All right, still spending a lot of time on scandals, not spending a lot of time on spending. No wonder why the man Ronald Reagan famously took to the shed is saying this is total bullshit. Well, he didn't. Anyway, David Stockman says that the scandals are bad and they bear watching, but this government spending is worse and bears fixing. David spells it all out in his sobering bestseller, one of the best books I've read in years, by the way, The Great Deformation, The Corruption of Capitalism in America. So, David, I think to your point last time you were here, you don't mind focusing on these scandals because some are pretty egregious, but not at the expense of all else, right?
Yeah, I think we're in a complete fantasy land. The budget hasn't been remotely fixed. This short-run blip...
Haven't you heard? We're almost halving these deficits.
It's due to one-time factors such as the Fannie Mae sending the Treasury...
So it's not real. Spending really isn't under control.
No, and if you look at the longer term, the next 10 years, and you use a honest, unvarnished economic forecast, not rosy scenario like CBO uses, you're facing 10 to 15 trillion of additional cumulative deficits on top of what we have.
Where do you get that? Just interest rates going higher? Or?
I get it because they're dramatically over forecasting the economy. They're saying we're going to go to 2023 without another recession. 14 years. Remember, the last one ended in 2009. There's never been 14 years without a recession. We're going to create 16.5 million jobs in 10 years. Last 10 years, 2.5 million. We're going to have wage growth of 5.3% a year for a decade. Last decade, 3%. So if you adjust for real-world sober economics, you're looking at 15
But sometimes
trillion.
you can have not-so-sobering surprises, right? Like 14 years ago, you could have argued who saw the Internet boom to the degree it boomed. Obviously unbooming, but that you can have pleasant surprises.
You could if your policy machinery is working properly.
Well, did the policy machinery bring you an Internet boom, though? It just happened.
It happened as a technological development, and it was a great thing.
But that's my point, Dave. Do you think something like that could be a pleasant surprise on which we're not planning or counting?
Yeah, but if the policy machinery is so out of control, and the Fed clearly is, we've now had a decade practically of zero interest rates. The Fed is massively intervening.
Well, now they're hinting that maybe we find out as soon as this week they're going to start.
Yeah, and look at the
what if they do, by the way? What if they do?
Well, they ought to. They ought to stop right now, but the market is totally hooked on this monetary heroin, as I call it. Even a hint that they're going to begin to taper back or reduce the $85 billion a month produces a hissy fit.
So they should resist the hissy fit.
Of course.
Know that there's going to be a hissy fit and move on.
Yes, and that's what they've been unwilling to do ever since Greenspan basically punted in 1998 at the time of the long-term capital crisis.
Could I ask you this?
Time after time, though, they've been doing the same thing.
I'm sorry, David. How much higher do you think interest rates would be if the Federal Reserve didn't do any of this nonsense? See, my point is I don't think that rates would be that much higher. So we're afraid of a boogeyman that might not be that.
No, I disagree with you.
Really?
I think that there is no savings in this economy. The savings
so how high would
rate is
rates
2.5%. I think they easily could be 300 basis points, 400 basis points higher.
Well, but my point is,
if that
as onerous as that is, that's not bad in the scheme of things of what you remember in the early 80s.
Right. No,
my point, I'm not
I agree.
forgiving you. I'm saying, look, for someone like who he and his wife got their first house for 13% mortgage, and at the time that seemed great. That backing up 3 or 4%, however awful that is, and I don't dismiss it, it's not nearly as bad as it was.
Well, that's true, but that was 15, 20 years ago. Today, the whole market is priced off interest rates that are utterly unrealistic.
So any jolt would be
Well,
jolting.
look at the housing market. We got a little tepid recovery here when they drove the 30-year mortgage rate down to 3.2%.
Well, obviously it's still continuing.
No, I think it's what you have is a mini bubble in the housing markets. So
you don't buy this housing recovery for real?
No, I don't think it's a real recovery at all. The big recovery.
So you don't buy real estate?
The big no, I don't buy it. The big
you rent? You just don't?
No, I mean obviously I've owned a home for a long time, but
in cash, full and clear, no mortgage.
But the point I'm making is that the recovery that you're seeing is due to ultra low interest rates and to speculators, both small-time flippers and big-time hedge funds and private equity.
So that's a bubble that's due to burst.
Yeah, and it isn't a real, sustainable, healthy recovery in housing. We got junk bonds now trading at a yield that's the lowest in history, when obviously that doesn't.
So
make
what would
any
David
sense.
Stockman do right now? Well, of course we're looking at these scandals and IRS overreach, and which we should, I guess. But your fear, if you had to intervene right now, you would do what?
Well, I would tell the public the truth, and number one, that the Fed is not designed to hold interest rates way below economic levels, to prop up the stock market, to manage and manipulate the entire bond market. It's created a huge bubble. That's going to stop. There's going to be a painful adjustment, but it has to happen. We've been deferring.
And then we get over that. We're the better for it.
We get over that. Ultimately, we're going to have to face up to the music on our fiscal circumstance. We're going to need to reform entitlements.
Means test a lot of things.
Social Security. We're going to have to raise a new source of revenue by taxing consumption.
But that will slow down the very economy you're talking about.
Of course, it should slow down the economy in the short run.
Then how's that going to help?
Because in the short run, we need to get ourselves healthy and sustainable economically, or we're just going to have one bubble after another, and then a crash, and then all the panic that occurs afterward as we desperately try to dig out with money printing and deficit stimulus and all the rest of it. We are now in a dead end. We've been repeating this cycle over and over, and obviously it doesn't work. It only works temporarily.
Well, David Stockman, thank you, I think.
Okay.
All right, he makes you think on what side you're on. Meanwhile, get ready.